Imagine you are an Imperial Guardsman.
Oh boy, never a good start.
Right. It's the worst job in the galaxy.
Mm.
But really put yourself there. You have been entrenched for weeks on a world that is just, choked by ash and relentless artillery fire.
Yeah, the classic grimdark meat grinder.
Exactly. You are pinned down in a trench line that is rapidly and horribly filling with the dead. Your las gun power packs are utterly depleted. I mean, completely dry. And this sheer, overwhelming tide of the enemy is cresting the ridge right in front of you.
So you're facing absolute undeniable annihilation.
Yeah, exactly. Total annihilation. But then the sky breaks open. The clouds physically part as drop pods slam into the earth with the force of literal meteors.
The cavalry arrives.
Right. The doors blow off and your saviors step out, the angels of death.
Right.
And they are massive, moving with this terrifying predatory grace clad in dark red and black armor.
Ah, the flesh tearers.
You know it. And they don't just engage the enemy, they completely butcher them. I mean, they tear through the advancing horde in a display of violence that just completely defies human comprehension. In minutes, the impossible tide is broken. You are saved.
But there's a catch, right?
A massive catch. Because as the dust settles, you look up from the mud. The battlefield is quiet, but the angels aren't stopping. They are standing among the slaughtered, and they are still revving their chainswords.
Yeah, that's the terrifying part.
They're looking around, their armor is just slick with gore, and their eyes are completely hollow, burning with this unquenchable, terrifying fury. And in that frozen second, you realize the ultimate horror of the 41st millennium.
Which is that you are just as terrified of your saviors as you were of the enemy.
Exactly, because you suddenly don't know if they recognize you as an ally or just the next target. Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We are exploring some excerpts today from a truly fascinating document titled Sons of the Chainsword, The Flesh Tearer's Legacy.
And that frozen second you just described, that is the exact razor's edge we are exploring today.
Right, because this deep dive isn't just a clean, heroic military history.
Not at all. It is an exploration of a fighting force engaged in an absolutely grueling two-front war. Yes, they fight the horrors of the galaxy on the outside, the aliens and the traitors, but the far more terrifying war, the one they are mathematically guaranteed to lose, is happening inside their own veins.
They're fighting their own biology.
Exactly. They embody the horrifyingly thin line between a perfectly loyal, genetically engineered protector and a mindless, uncontrollable monster.
And it forces us to confront a deeply unsettling reality about engineered weapons. I mean, when you design a warrior, you expect the safety mechanism to work.
Right, you expect precision. You expect control.
Yeah, precision. But with the flesh tearers, we are looking at a scenario where the very biological enhancements designed to make them the ultimate saviors have mutated into the exact mechanism of their damnation.
It's a complete inversion of the super soldier trope.
It really is. And to understand how they reach this point where an allied soldier cowers in a trench praying the angels don't turn around, we have to look at the foundation. We have to look at the psychological and historical wreckage they were built on.
You really can't ignore the historical context here. You just cannot understand the flesh tearers without understanding the fallout of the Horus Heresy and specifically the Second Founding.
Which was basically the biggest trauma in human history, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The heresy wasn't just a political civil war. It was a trauma that fundamentally shattered the psychology of the Imperium. I mean, half the military turned on the other half.
Right.
So when the Loyalists finally emerged from the ashes of that conflict, the immediate reaction of the surviving leadership wasn't just to rebuild. It was to ensure that a rebellion of that scale could literally never happen again.
Because the original legions were just too big?
Exactly. These massive, galaxy-conquering brotherhoods of tens of thousands of Space Marines, they were deemed too dangerous to exist in their original form.
Right, because the power was too concentrated. If one Primarch fell to chaos, he took an entire armada and 100,000 super soldiers with him.
A single point of failure that could doom the galaxy.
So the Second Founding was essentially this massive enforced vivisection of the imperial military apparatus. They took these ancient, proud legions and hacked them apart into much smaller, isolated chapters.
Capping them at roughly 1,000 warriors each.
Yeah. And for the descendants of Sanguinius, the Blood Angels Legion, this meant tearing apart a brotherhood that had bled together through the most apocalyptic siege in human history.
Precisely. It was a restructuring born entirely out of fear and distrust. The Flesh Tearers don't begin their existence as a chapter with some triumphant mandate. They begin it as a consequence of suspicion.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, their very genesis as an independent entity is tied to the Imperium deciding that Space Marines are inherently untrustworthy in large numbers. That is a colossal psychological burden to carry from day one.
It's like being born and immediately being told you're dangerous.
Exactly. You are born into a universe that essentially tells you, we need you to fight, but we're going to fracture your family because we are terrified of what you might do if you stay together.
Now, you might be thinking, well, every chapter created during the Second Founding had to deal with that exact same fragmentation. What makes the Flesh Tearers so uniquely volatile from the start?
And that is the million-dollar question.
Right. And that brings us directly to their first chapter master, Nasir Amit. When the Blood Angels Legion was broken up, Amit was given command of this newly formed chapter, and his reputation was already deeply entrenched.
Oh yeah, the Flesh Terror himself.
Exactly. He was notoriously, infamously savage. In fact, his brutality in combat was so extreme that Sanguinius himself, his genetic father, and the literal paragon of the Imperium censured Amit for his excessive zeal.
We really need to stop and consider the sheer gravity of that censure.
Right, because it's not like a normal reprimand.
No, not at all. We are not talking about a modern human rights tribunal judging a soldier. We are talking about Sanguinius. This is a being engineered for galactic conquest, a demigod who has waged wars of compliance across hundreds of worlds.
He's waded through oceans of blood.
Exactly. Sanguinius understands the necessity of extreme violence better than almost anyone. For a being of his martial magnitude to look at Nasir Amit's combat record and recoil to formally declare you have crossed the line into savagery, it reveals a horrifying baseline for the Flesh Tearers.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it fundamentally breaks the concept of inherited nobility.
How so?
Well, if you are a Space Marine, your Primarch is your compass. Sanguinius is the angel. He represents the absolute pinnacle of grace, martial pride, and artistic soul within the Imperium.
He's literally the golden boy.
Yeah. So to have the angel look at your founder and say, you are too bloody, is devastating. It's like a legendary, highly disciplined general having to publicly reprimand his most elite special forces commander for being too aggressive.
That's a really good analogy.
Right. If the founder of your specific brotherhood is already crossing the line, it's the physical embodiment of your own soul telling you that your nature is flawed. What hope do the succeeding generations have of staying balanced?
And this establishes the cultural bedrock of the Flesh Tearers. If the founder of your brotherhood, the man whose philosophy, whose tactics, whose very name defines your existence, is already operating beyond the pale of acceptable violence, you're starting at a deficit.
They really are.
You are starting off with an ideological anchor that is completely detached from the restraint practiced by your parent legion.
You know, I always struggle with Amit's motivations during that era. Was this extreme savagery a conscious, calculated tactical choice? Was he just applying absolute terror as a weapon to break the enemy's will faster?
A lot of Imperial commanders did use terror tactics, like the Night Lords.
Exactly. Or, and this is the far more terrifying prospect, were Amit's actions actually the very early, entirely unrecognized symptoms of the genetic flaw that would ultimately consume his lineage?
I would argue it is undeniably the latter. And that is what makes the censure by Sanguinius so profoundly tragic.
Because they didn't know.
Right. Neither Sanguinius nor Amit truly understood what was brewing in their gene seed at that point. Sanguinius was punishing Amit for perceived moral or tactical failing. He was treating it as a lack of discipline.
Oh, wow.
In reality, he was punishing a symptom. It's the equivalent of punishing a man with early-stage neurological decay because his hands are shaking.
That is just heartbreaking, honestly.
It really is. The tragedy is that Amit internalized this censure. He carried the shame of his father's disappointment, never fully realizing that the darkness Sanguinius saw in him wasn't a choice. It was a biological inevitability that was going to damn every single son that followed him.
Which pulls us directly into the mechanics of that biological time bomb. Amit's savagery was the tremor, but the flaw itself is the earthquake.
The big one.
Yeah. The Flesh Tearers suffer from a genetic mutation that dramatically accelerates the twin curses inherent to all sons of Sanguinius, the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. Now, if you are familiar with the lore, you know that every Blood Angel descendant carries this burden.
It's the hallmark of their bloodline.
Right. But the distinction here is critical. The Flesh Tearers don't just carry it. It is actively degrading them at a rate unseen anywhere else in the galaxy. They are more susceptible to this flaw than any other chapter in existence.
We really need to dissect the interaction between these two conditions, because the mechanism of their downfall is incredibly specific.
Okay, break it down for us. What is the red thirst versus the black rage?
So the red thirst is, at its core, a profound physiological degradation. It is a literal vampiric craving for blood and violence. It is the body demanding sustenance through slaughter.
Like an extreme physical addiction.
Exactly. The black rage, however, is a catastrophic psychological collapse. It's the psychic echo of Sanguinius's death at the hands of Horus, rebounding through the genetic lineage.
Because Sanguinius died in such a horrific, psychically resonant way.
Yes. When a warrior falls to the black rage, he loses his own identity entirely. He literally believes he is Sanguinius in his final agonizing moments. He perceives everyone around him as traitors.
So how does the mutation specifically doom the flesh terrors? Why are they accelerating toward the cliffs so much faster than the regular blood angels?
It's the compounding interest of their genetic debt. In the flesh terrors, the red thirst is so pronounced, so aggressively close to the surface, that it acts as a constant grinding abrasive on their psychological barriers.
Oh, I see. They feed into each other.
Precisely. Imagine trying to maintain a Zen-like state of mental discipline, which is absolutely required to hold off the black rage, while your physiology is constantly screaming at you to rip out the throat of the person standing next to you.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. The physiological craving exhausts the mental defenses. Because their bodies are burning so hot with the thirst, their minds fracture much faster, inevitably plunging them into the black rage.
You know, the word worsening is the true horror here. It is an active degradation. It means their gene seed isn't a static blueprint anymore.
No, it's rotting.
Yeah, every new initiate they implant, every generation they raise, has a shorter shelf life. The time it takes for a newly minted flesh terror to devolve from a fully functional tactical super soldier into a hallucinating butcher is shrinking.
It's a mathematical certainty that, barring an absolute miracle, the chapter will eventually consume itself.
Which completely subverts the entire paradigm of the transhuman warrior. You look at any other elite military force in the galaxy, and their biological enhancements are their greatest asset.
Right. A Space Marine's biology allows him to survive toxic atmospheres, heal from catastrophic trauma, process information at superhuman speeds.
Their biology solves problems. But for the flesh terrors, their biology is an autoimmune disease. The very blood that grants them their legendary speed and strength is the exact same substance that is actively eroding their sanity.
It really is worse than an autoimmune disease. It's like their own immune system has been weaponized against their psyche.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this raises a massive logistical and political question regarding the Imperium.
Okay, let's hear it.
The Inquisition, the High Lords of Terra, the broader Imperial military, they aren't blind. The flesh terrors are infamous. They are watched with abject fear and suspicion by Allied commanders.
For good reason, as we established with the Guardsman scenario.
Exactly. The Imperium knows these warriors are biological time bombs teetering on the brink of becoming mindless butchers. They know that deploying the flesh terrors means risking a scenario where the Angels turn their chain swords on the Imperial Guard regiments fighting alongside them.
It's a known risk factor.
So why on earth does the Imperium tolerate their existence? Why not shut the chapter down? I mean, if you have an artillery battery that randomly fires into your own command tents, you decommission the artillery.
Well, you decommission the artillery if you have a surplus of other guns.
And the Imperium doesn't.
The Imperium absolutely does not. The calculus of the Imperium is driven by desperate existential pragmatism. They are fighting a war on a million fronts against Tyranid hive fleets, Orquas, and the encroaching forces of chaos.
The galaxy is constantly on fire.
Right. In an environment of absolute unending slaughter, the tactical value of a deeply flawed, highly volatile asset still overwhelmingly outweighs the value of having no asset at all.
So it's just a numbers game. Is their sheer destructive utility in war simply worth the horrifying risk of keeping them around?
Entirely. Think about the output. A flesh terror might eventually succumb to the black rage and become a catastrophic liability, perhaps even slaughtering Allied personnel.
Which is awful.
It is awful.
Yeah.
But before that happens, that same flesh terror is going to wade into a Tyranid swarm and butcher thousands of Xenos. He is going to break siege lines that 100,000 mortal soldiers couldn't even dent.
So they use them until they break.
Yes. The Imperium doesn't keep them around out of loyalty to Sanguinius, and certainly not out of compassion for their suffering. They keep them around because they are a weapon that reliably decimates the enemy. It is a weapon that burns the hand of the user, absolutely.
But when the user is being swarmed by predators,
Exactly. When you're being swarmed by predators, you will gladly suffer third-degree burns to wield the torch.
a weapon that burns the hand of the user. That captures the callous utility perfectly. But we have to look at the psychological damage that does to the chapter itself.
The internal toll must be staggering.
Because carrying that time bomb doesn't just alienate them from the high command, it isolates them completely on a cultural level.
Right.
If their psychology is a pressure cooker built by the Imperium's distrust, and their biology is constantly turning up the heat, how does that internal culture actually function? They're building an identity entirely around the struggle against their very own nature.
The isolation is absolute. I mean, they are protectors who are fundamentally reviled by the people they protect. Think about the standard reward cycle for a normal soldier.
You get a medal, you go home.
Right. You endure the horrors of combat, but you are sustained by the belief that you are defending humanity and that humanity honors your sacrifice.
There's mutual respect.
But the flesh tearers are denied that basic psychological sustenance. When they secure a world, there are no parades. The planetary governors don't welcome them into the spires. They lock the gates and pray the Space Marines leave before the bloodlust takes hold.
Wow, that's incredibly bleak.
Allied commanders literally refuse to share tactical data grids with them. They're treated like a rabid attack dog that the Imperium only lets off the chain when there are no other options.
So what does this all mean? It reminds me of being a superhero whom the city is absolutely terrified of.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to look at it.
You save the day, you bleed for the citizens, but the moment you walk down the street, people lock their doors and hide.
You're still the monster in their eyes.
Right. And the tragic irony is that this profound, systemic, constant suspicion might actually accelerate the Black Rage.
How so?
Well, biology and psychology are inextricably linked, right? The Black Rage is fundamentally a break in mental fortitude. If everyone treats you like a monster, how long until you stop trying to prove them wrong?
Oh, I see.
If your entire existence is defined by the disgust and terror of your allies, it becomes a catastrophic, self-fulfilling prophecy.
You actually see this dynamic in severe institutional trauma in the real world. When an individual or a group is relentlessly categorized as dangerous, they begin to internalize that identity.
It's exhausting to constantly fight against how people perceive you.
Extremely. The flesh terrors have to expend a massive amount of cognitive energy just proving they're still in control. Every single interaction with an outsider is an exercise in restraining the red thirst.
Just having a conversation requires holding back a murder craving.
Yes. Over decades and centuries of warfare, that exhaustion accumulates. The Imperium's fear literally starved the flesh terrors of the empathy and brotherhood that might actually help them maintain their psychological anchor.
If the universe has already decided you are a butcher, the temptation to simply stop fighting the tide, to just let the thirst take over and give them the monster they expect, must be overwhelming. Why even fight it?
And yet they do. This is the pivot point of their entire legacy. They don't just lay down and die.
Right.
The leadership of the chapter, specifically their current chapter master, absolutely refuses to let his brother succumb quietly. He looks at the shrinking lifespan of his warriors. He looks at the encroaching madness. He looks at the utter disdain of the Inquisition, and his response is absolute defiance.
That defiance is where the narrative shifts from a grim inevitability into a story of raw, terrifying resilience. It transforms their existence from a mere tragedy into something almost profoundly heroic. But how do you actually defy genetics?
That's the hard part.
Right, because it's not a policy change. You can't just mandate that the Black Rage stops affecting your troops. So what are the actual mechanics of this defiance? How does the chapter master operationalize the refusal to succumb quietly?
He operationalizes it through relentless, unyielding momentum. Defiance for the flesh terrors means refusing to hide their curse, but also refusing to let it sideline them.
So they don't just hide away in a fortress.
You know, they don't retreat to their fortress monastery to die in meditation or seek some quiet cure. They throw themselves into the most brutal, desperate war zones the galaxy has to offer.
They go straight to the meat grinder.
Exactly. They take the absolute vanguard. The leadership policy is essentially, if we are going to burn out, we are going to ensure the fire engulfs as many enemies of mankind as mathematically possible. It is a conscious choice to weaponize their own degradation.
It's a refusal to go gently into that good night. It's the ultimate expression of agency in a scenario where they have been stripped of all control.
That's a great way to frame it.
They can't cure the flaw. They can't fix the Imperium's perception of them. The only thing they have left to control is the manner in which they die. It is a decision to drag the night down with them.
To go out swinging.
Yeah. But let's follow that operational logic to its inevitable conclusion. Because they are isolated from humanity and tormented by their own biology, the battlefield becomes the only place where they can truly express their identity. If they are throwing themselves into the vanguard, and their psychology is this tightly wound pressure cooker, where does the steam escape?
It escapes in the combat drop. The battlefield is the only environment where the flesh tearers are permitted to fully express their identity without holding back. It serves as a devastating, catastrophic release valve.
Let's examine their combat doctrine because it is the physical manifestation of their psychological trauma.
The art of the killing frenzy.
Exactly. They are a deeply assault-focused chapter. They prioritize intimate, overwhelming, brutal close combat. You don't see flesh tearers engaging in drawn-out artillery duels or complex long-range sniper interdiction.
No, that requires too much patience.
Right. They don't fight from a distance. They close the gap as fast as possible, heavily utilizing jump packs, assault vehicles, and drop pods. They want to be close enough to literally feel the blood spray.
We have to analyze the paradox of this doctrine, though. It's like running a nuclear reactor without control rods to power a city during a blackout.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right. Yes, you get the absolute maximum energy output required to win the war. But a meltdown isn't just a risk. It is a guaranteed, engineered feature of the system.
Because they're pushing themselves to the absolute limit intentionally.
Yes. Their combat doctrine is built around accommodating their madness. The Red Thirst demands visceral violence. The Black Rage demands fury. By prioritizing close combat with chain swords and power fists, they are creating a controlled environment for the madness to vent.
But is it controlled? I mean, really?
Well, controlled is a relative term.
Because their recent history is a chaotic mix of heroic sacrifice and horrifying atrocity. Those two concepts are completely antithetical in traditional military history, but for the flesh tearers, they are the exact same event viewed from different timestamps.
Exactly. The heroic sacrifice happens in the first hour of the drop. They slam into the Tyranid swarm, they take the brunt of the casualties, and they break the enemy lines to save the Imperial Guard regiments. That is the heroism.
And then the second hour hits?
Right. The atrocity happens in the second hour, when the enemy is broken. But the flesh tearer's internal reactor is fully critical. The thirst has been fed, the rage is unspooling, and they can no longer differentiate between the retreating enemy and the Allied militia scrambling out of the trenches.
The line between loyal servant and monster is completely erased in the blood slick. How will history even judge them? How does the Imperium reconcile a heroic sacrifice that ends in a horrifying atrocity?
It's a complete fracturing of military morality.
It really is, and this brings up a concept mentioned in the text that I find deeply disturbing. It notes that their only hope for salvation is to lose themselves in the very slaughter that defines its identity.
Ah, yes. The concept of salvation through slaughter.
I have to completely push back on this. How can slaughter be salvation? If your only release is brutally aggressive close combat, aren't you just accelerating your own doom?
It does seem counterintuitive.
It's like trying to put out a house fire by throwing gasoline on it. You feed the beast to keep it quiet, but every time it eats, it grows larger and wakes up faster next time. I mean, imagine the sheer terror of fighting alongside them, not knowing if they will stop when the enemy is dead.
You are absolutely right, but you are looking at salvation through a lens of survival. For a normal human, salvation means living to see peacetime.
It means going home.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But for a flesh tearer, survival's off the table. They know they are damned. Salvation for them is entirely about the purity of purpose in their final moments.
Purity of purpose.
Yes. It means dying with a chainsword buried in the chest of an orc warlord, rather than living long enough to be locked in a cage in the Tower of the Lost on their homeworld, completely insane, screaming at ghosts.
Oh, wow. So it's salvation from the indignity of the cage.
Yes. The slaughter is their salvation because it directs the inevitable collapse outward. It is a horrific calculus. If a flesh tearer is going to lose his mind, it is a spiritual victory if that mental break happens precisely when he's surrounded by 100 Tyranid warriors.
Because at least he's taking the enemy with him.
Exactly. The violent release of the Black Rage is harnessed to serve the Emperor one last time. It's not salvation of the body, and it might not even be salvation of the soul. It is salvation of their utility.
That is incredibly bleak. It completely fractures any application of military ethics. I mean, how does an inquisitor or a lord general even judge a force like this? Standard morality just doesn't apply.
It doesn't apply at all.
You can't court-martial a biological impulse. If a flesh terror slaughters a civilian Havelock because the genetic echo of Sanguinius's death completely overrode his consciousness, is he a war criminal or is he a victim of inherited pathology?
The Imperium judges them not by morality, but by collateral damage metrics. As long as the enemy death toll is exponentially higher than the Allied death toll, the Inquisition turns a blind eye, albeit a highly suspicious one.
Right, they're always watching.
Always. But on a deeper philosophical level, as we bring these threads together, the flesh terrors represent the physical embodiment of the Imperium's greatest, most repressed fear.
Which is what? That they'll turn traitor.
No, it's deeper than that. The fear that control is an absolute illusion. The Imperium is built on the idea of engineered mastery. They believe that with enough genetic manipulation, psycho-indoctrination, and fanatical faith, they can forge the perfect weapons to hold back the dark.
They want absolute order.
Right. And the flesh terrors prove that this is a lie. They prove that beneath the ceramite armor, beneath centuries of hypnotherapy and tactical brilliance, the chaotic beast of raw biology is still there. It's just waiting to slip the leash.
It speaks to the utter fragility of the soul in the 41st millennium. I mean, you can take the lineage of Sanguinius, the absolute gold standard of imperial nobility and grace, and with just a microscopic worsening flaw in the blood, you reduce demigods to rabid, howling predators.
It's the ultimate tragic irony.
It really is. Nasir Amit didn't design the genetic degradation. The current chapter master didn't ask for it. It is a tragedy of inherited sin playing out in real time across the galaxy, proving that even the most noble of lineages can be reduced to monsters by circumstances completely beyond their control.
And yet, I keep coming back to that core of defiance we talked about. The tragedy is immense, the violence is catastrophic, but there is a profound, grim nobility in their refusal to just lay down and die.
There is a tragic beauty to it.
Absolutely. They are fighting a war they mathematically cannot win against an enemy in their own blood, and they are doing it while the galaxy they bleed for completely reviles them. They fight to the absolute last drop of blood, knowing full well that the blood itself is damned.
It is the ultimate test of duty. When the biology fails, when the legacy fails, when the allies turn away, the duty is the only thing left.
It's all they have.
As we close out this deep dive into the harrowing legacy of the flesh terrors, I want you to step back from the battlefields of the 41st millennium and consider the underlying human question at the core of their existence.
The heavy one.
It is. Think about the burden of inevitable corruption. If you were burdened with an inescapable curse, something that was slowly, inevitably turning your greatest strengths and talents into a horrific liability to everyone around you, how would you confront it?
But what's the right choice?
Exactly. Would you follow the path of the flesh terrors? Would you fight defiantly to the bitter end, weaponizing your own degradation to do as much good as violently possible, even if it meant guaranteeing atrocious collateral damage to the people you love?
Is it nobler to burn the house down fighting the wolves, or to leave the house unguarded so you don't start the fire?
That's the perfect way to phrase it. Or would true heroism actually demand the opposite? Would the ultimate act of courage be the willingness to simply lay down your arms, to abandon your duty and step away entirely, extinguishing the flame yourself before you become the very monster you swore to destroy?
There is no clean answer. Only the consequences of the choice.
There never is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the foundations, and we'll catch you next time.